There's a kind of man who spends his whole life making sure everybody knows his name, and there's a kind who spends it making sure his family never has to ask anybody for anything. I've been the second kind for as long as I can remember. Quiet. Forgettable if you saw me at a gas station, and it stayed that way right up until a man with a famous last name decided my granddaughter wasn't fit to carry his. Keep that in mind, because everything I'm about to tell you only lands right if you understand that one thing about me first. Welcome back to Dad's Pure Revenge. Pour yourself something, settle in, and let me tell you how a quiet man handles loud people. If stories like this hit you somewhere real, do me a favor and tap that like button, leave a comment, and make sure you're subscribed. It matters more than you'd think. It was a Thursday in late September down in Tulsa, the first afternoon of the year that didn't feel like standing inside an oven. I had the garage open, the box fan going, and I was lying half under a 1970 Chevy C10 I'd been rebuilding off and on for 2 years. My hands were black to the wrist, the radio was playing something old and steady, and my phone started buzzing across the concrete where I'd left it. I wiped my hands on a shop rag and squinted at it. My daughter, 2:40 in the afternoon on a workday. She never called in the afternoon, she texted, long, careful texts with proper punctuation, the kind that took her 10 minutes to write. A phone call from her at 2:40 meant something had come off the rails. I answered, "Hey, sweetheart, nothing at first, just air." Then I heard her breathing, and I knew that breathing. It's the sound a grown woman makes when she's holding herself together with both hands and it's not working. Daddy. Her voice cracked right down the middle of that one word. Can you come get me? I was already on my feet. Where are you? The river, down by the pedestrian bridge, the benches. A pause, wet around the edges. I've got Maisie with me. Don't move. I'm coming. I didn't change my shirt. I didn't wash up past the rag. I got in my truck, a faded silver Ford with 210,000 miles on it, and I drove down toward the river, with my heart going like a jackhammer and my brain very, very calm. That's a thing I learned a long time ago. The worse it gets, the slower I go on the inside. I found her on a bench under the trees where the trail runs along the water, the spot where I used to bring her to feed ducks when she was small enough to ride on my shoulders. She wasn't small now, she was 31, and she was sitting with her spine curled forward like somebody had stacked something heavy across her shoulders and walked off without taking it back. Next to her sat my granddaughter, 6 years old, legs swinging because they didn't reach the ground yet, working on a cherry popsicle that was losing the war against the heat and running red down her wrist. She had on the little denim jacket I bought her in the spring. She looked up when she saw me and her whole face went bright. Grandpa. She held the popsicle up like evidence. This one's the good kind. It's the red one. It sure is, baby. My throat did something complicated. That's the best one. Then I saw the suitcases. 2 of them sitting in the grass at my daughter's feet. Hard shell, the navy ones I'd given her and her husband 3 Christmases ago. 2 suitcases on a bench by the river on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't say anything about them. Not yet. I sat down on the other side of Maisie, put my arm around that little girl, and I looked out at the brown water moving by for a good 4 or 5 seconds before I let myself look at my daughter. Why aren't you at work? She laughed. There wasn't anything happy in it. It was the laugh that comes out sideways when crying isn't an option in front of a 6-year-old. I don't work there anymore, she said. Since when? Since this morning? She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, quick, like she could erase it before I noticed. They walked me out, Daddy. 2 of the floor managers I trained, they walked me out to my car like I was going to steal something. I kept my voice level. Walked you out of Lockwood Fine Foods. The regional grocery outfit her husband's family had been running for 3 generations, the kind of place with chalkboard signs and a cheese counter and prices that made you feel something. My daughter had worked there 6 years, started as a buyer, worked up to managing the whole perishables side. She was good at it. She was better at it than the man whose name was on the building, and everybody who worked the floor knew it. And the suitcases, I said. She looked down at them like she'd forgotten they were real. His father came by the house last night, to your house, to our house. Her jaw tightened. He let himself in. He does that. He sat at my kitchen table and he told my husband that he'd already made some calls, that my position was being eliminated, and then she stopped, looked at Maisie, lowered her voice. He said that if my husband had any sense, he'd think hard about whether he wanted to keep dragging the family name through. And I'm quoting him now. Common stock. Common stock, I repeated. He said our people weren't the kind the Lockwood name was built on. He said it right there, at my own table, where she eats breakfast. She nodded at her daughter, and then he told my husband he'd be a fool to stay married to it. The water kept moving. A jogger went by. Somewhere a kid was laughing on the playground up the hill, and it all just kept happening like the world hadn't tipped sideways. And where's your husband right now? I asked. She shook her head, and I watched her try to figure out how to answer that. He didn't say anything, Daddy. He just sat there. His father talked and talked, and he just sat there with his hands in his lap. Her voice went thin. So I packed 2 bags and I took my girl and I left because I wasn't going to sit at a table where I had to be told whether I was worth keeping. Maisie tugged my sleeve. Grandpa, the red part's gone. It's just the white part now. That's all right, sweetheart. The white part's still good. You finish it up. I sat there with my arm around that little girl, and her father's stubborn chin and her mother's quick brown eyes. 6 years old, eating a melting popsicle, completely unbothered because she trusted that the grown-ups around her had the situation in hand. She was right to trust that, she just didn't know yet how true it was. I stood up, slow, deliberate, the way I move when my mind's already 3 turns down the road and my body's just catching up. Grab the bags, I said. My daughter blinked at me. Daddy, the bags. I reached down and took my granddaughter's sticky little hand. We're not doing this on a park bench. Come on, both of you. Get in the truck. She knew that voice. Every one of my kids knew that voice. It wasn't a voice you argued with. She picked up the suitcases without another word. We drove north through town, past the warehouses and the rail yards. She kept glancing over at me, waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to be soft or angry or fatherly or anything. I turned up the radio instead. Some preacher had it tuned to gospel and I let it ride. Daddy, you're being weird, she said. You're scaring me a little. Good, I said. Means you're awake? Where are we even going? I didn't answer right away. That's how long I'd been getting up before the sun and coming home after dark and saying not one word about any of it to anybody. Not to my neighbors who thought I did something boring in shipping. Not to the men I went to church with. Not even, all the way, to my late wife, God keep her. She knew enough. She knew the parts that mattered. But not even she knew the whole shape of it, because I'd decided a long time ago that nobody would. I learned that the hard way. My own father built something with his hands when I was a boy. A trucking outfit, small but solid, a half-dozen rigs, and a reputation for never being late. And the day people figured out he had a little money, they came out of the woodwork. Partners with their hands out. A brother-in-law with a sure thing. A bank that smelled blood. By the time I was 17, they'd picked him clean, and the man who taught me everything I know spent his last years apologizing for things that weren't his fault. So when I built my own thing, I built it underground, in plain sight. I drove old trucks. I lived in a brick ranch on a street where nobody had 2 nickels to spare. I let the world think I was nothing much, because the world is gentle with men it thinks have nothing to take. And in all those years, the only thing I ever planned to do with it was hand it down clean, to my daughter, to that little girl with the popsicle. That was the whole point. A man named Pierce Lockwood had just made himself my business. I pulled off the highway onto a long industrial road out past the airport, the kind of road that doesn't go anywhere unless you have a reason. At the end of it sat a facility the size of 4 football fields, low and gray and humming with rail spurs running into it and a yard full of refrigerated trailers lined up like dominoes. The sign over the main gate was small, just steel letters, no flash. Ridgeline Logistics Group, freight and cold storage. My daughter sat up straight. Daddy, what is this place? I pulled into the spot by the front door. The one with my name on it, the only sign of my name on the whole property. I cut the engine and sat there a second, looking at what 31 years of keeping my mouth shut had built. Everything you're looking at, I said, is yours. Always was going to be. She stared at me. What are you talking about? I'll explain all of it, but not in a parking lot. I opened the door. Come on, there's a man I need to talk to, and tomorrow your father-in-law's about to find out whose freezer his whole company's been living in. She had no idea what that meant yet. Pierce Lockwood didn't either, but he was about to. If you've made it this far and you want more stories like this, it'd mean a lot if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. Truly. It keeps these coming. There's a particular quiet that falls when somebody realizes they've spent years being wrong about a person standing right in front of them. It's not dramatic. It just settles like the dust does after a truck pulls out of a gravel lot. I'd spent my whole working life living inside that quiet, and Pierce Lockwood was finally about to learn what it sounded like. I got to Ridgeline at 5:15 the next morning. I always did. You want to know whether a company is healthy? Don't read its numbers first. Stand at the gate before dawn and see who shows up and who doesn't. I'd been the one showing up first for 31 years. My office sat on the 2nd floor, a corner with glass that looked down over the dock and the cold side floor. Nothing fancy in it. A steel desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard full of figures that would have made a banker reach for his chest. And one framed photo in the corner. My daughter at about 9, holding up a sunfish she'd caught off the dock at the lake, grinning like she'd hauled in a marlin. I looked at that photo every morning. That morning it sat different in my chest. My operations chief knocked twice and came in at 5:30 sharp, same as every day for the last 20 years. Big man, slow to talk, never wrong about anything that mattered. He took one look at my face and sat down without being asked. You want me to get coffee first, he said, or do I need it for what's coming? Pull the Lockwood account, I said. He didn't move for a second. Then he reached for his tablet. Lockwood Fine Foods, cold storage, the freight side, the last mile out to all 11 stores. He scrolled. Their midterm. 20 months left on the master agreement. They run? He glanced up at me. A hair over 5 million through us a year, boss. Just about everything they sell that has to stay cold rides on our trucks and sleeps in our building. $5 million a year. For 9 years, Pierce Lockwood had sat at fundraisers and country club lunches talking about his family business, like it was a cathedral his grandfather built with bare hands, and not once had he mentioned that everything he sold cold, the dairy, the meat, the seafood he was so proud of, lived and breathed inside a building owned by a man he'd just called common stock. He'd been cashing his fancy reputation on the back of my freezers and never knew it. I almost smiled. Almost. I'm not canceling him, I said. My operations man waited. I'm restructuring the relationship. Pull every clause we've got on vendor and partner performance review. I want a formal notice drafted, standard language, nothing hot, nothing personal. Just that Ridgeline is initiating a full account review effective immediately, and that disbursements and scheduling priority are suspended pending that review. He raised an eyebrow about a quarter inch, which on him was a shout. We're inside our rights on that? Section 4, Clause C. It's in the master agreement they signed. They've got 15 business days to respond before we make a decision about renewal. I leaned back. I know it's in there. I wrote it. He nodded slow, the way a man does when he hears something and understands it's anything but. And who's running the review? I picked up the photo of my daughter, looked at it, set it back down facing me. Our new director of strategic accounts, I said. He blinked. We don't have a director of. We do as of this morning. She answered on the fourth ring, half asleep. She and Maisie had slept in her old bedroom the first time in a dozen years, the two of them curled up in a full bed under the quilt my wife made. Daddy, it's barely 6. It's 6:15. How's the baby? A rustle. Still out, sleeping like none of it happened. That's because she knows she's safe. You both are. You hear me, Daddy? Her voice had that careful edge, the one that means please don't make me hope for something. I need you at the building by 9, I said. Wear something you'd wear to make a decision in? I'm going to walk you through the floor, introduce you to people who've been waiting your whole life to meet you, and then I'm going to sit you down and show you exactly what I've spent 31 years building and exactly where you fit in it. A long silence. Then small. Why me? Why now? Because it was always going to be you. Now's just when you needed it. I picked up my coffee. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. She walked through the front doors at 4 minutes to 9. I watched her from up on the floor before she saw me. Watched her stop just inside, look up at the ceiling 40 feet over her head, the catwalks and the racking and the forklifts moving in their lanes, a couple hundred people doing 100 coordinated things at once. Her mouth came open a little. That's the right reaction, I thought. Hold on to that. When she got up to me, she looked like a woman doing long division in her head and not liking the answer. This whole time, she said. This whole time. You drove me to my high school graduation in a truck with a hole in the floorboard. Still got a hole in the floorboard. Mom knew? She knew the parts that mattered. And she knew exactly why we kept the rest of it quiet. I let that sit. Money changes how people look at you, sweetheart. The wrong ones find out what you've got, and suddenly everybody's your best friend and everybody's got a reason and a story. I wanted you to stand on your own legs first. Build your own backbone. Know that whatever you became it because you were good, not because of me. We walked the floor. A man on the dock who'd been with me 18 years shook her hand and said she had my eyes. A woman running the cold side told her she'd heard about how she ran Lockwood's perishables, and that they'd been doing it wrong over there for years. My daughter's face did something I hadn't seen since her mother passed. Something like ground coming up under her feet. We ended in my office. I closed the door, poured 2 coffees, and laid 3 folders on the desk. The numbers, the structure, and the Lockwood file. She picked up the last one. I watched her read it, watched the second she registered the name on the cover, watched her jaw go tight. Lockwood Fine Foods, she said quietly. This is them. This is his company. Has been a customer here 9 years. She set it down slow. You're telling me that while that man sat at my kitchen table, telling my husband I was common stock, he was running his whole business through a building you own. The room was very quiet. Then she said, with a steadiness that honestly took me by surprise, what's the notice in here? Account review. Disbursements and priority suspended pending evaluation, standard. I slid the second document across. An offer letter. Director of Strategic Accounts, Ridgeline Logistics Group. The salary line on it would have made her old paycheck at Lockwood's look like a tip. And who's running the review? She said. You are. if you want it. Her hands went still on the desk. And here's where I saw the thing I've been hoping I wouldn't have to see, and was proud to see anyway. She didn't grab it. She got scared. Daddy, I've never. She pressed her lips together. I managed a perishables department. This is a different thing. What if I freeze up? What if I sit across from him and I'm 22 years old again and he makes me feel like nothing the way he always could? I came around the desk and sat on the edge of it, so I was looking down at her like I did when she was little and the world had gotten too big. You catered that man's anniversary party with your own 2 hands, I said. You sat in a hospital chair for 3 nights straight when his wife was sick, while he was off playing golf. You planned every holiday that family ever had and never once got a thank you that meant anything. I leaned in. You already know how to carry these people. The only thing you've been missing is a room where you're the one who decides. I'm handing you the room. The rest of it I'll teach you. She stared at the offer letter a long time. When he gets the review notice, she finally said, he's going to know something's wrong. He's going to make some calls. He's going to ask around. And sooner or later, I said, he's going to figure out whose building he's been living in for 9 years. And then, sweetheart, I sat back. He's going to have to call you. That was the most satisfied I'd felt in 3 decades of building things where nobody could see me do it. She picked up a pen off my desk, looked at it, and signed her name. The notice went out at 4 that afternoon. By the next morning, I had 3 missed calls on my cell from a number I knew by heart and had never once saved. I let every one of them go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to talk to me. He needed to talk to my daughter first, and my daughter, for the first time in 2 days, had slept the whole night through. She was standing when he walked in, not parked behind the desk trying to look bigger than she was, standing by the window, jacket on, hands easy at her sides, the cold floor humming away down below like a heart that had never once skipped a beat. He stopped in the doorway. I was out in the hall just past the frame, close enough to hear every word, far enough to leave my girl her own room. I'd promised myself I wouldn't go in. This wasn't mine to win. It was hers. I heard him say her name, careful, recalibrating. The voice of a man who walked in expecting one thing and was already quietly doing the math on something else. Have a seat, she said, even. Warm enough to be polite. Final enough to be the boss. I heard the chair. He started the way men like him always start. Smooth. There'd clearly been some misunderstanding about the notice. A long, loyal relationship. Surely if reasonable people talk through the numbers, the whole velvet runaround. There's no misunderstanding, she said. Ridgeline conducts account reviews. It's standard. It's in your master agreement. A small pause. Section 4. Clause C, the quiet that came after that had a weight to it. He tried again, softer. He understood things between the families were complicated. He didn't want personal matters clouding what had always been a productive professional. You're right, she said. Business is business. I heard him stop. He hadn't expected agreement, which is why, she went on. I want to be completely professional about what comes next. A folder slid across the desk. We've prepared a revised agreement. New terms. Fair pricing, honest delivery windows, real performance standards. Nothing punitive. Nothing personal. I could picture him, the silver hair, the good jacket, 9 years of comfortable assumptions coming apart line by line in his hands. A document drawn up by the daughter-in-law he'd thrown out of his family 48 hours before. These terms, he said slowly, are reasonable. I know, she said. I wrote them to be. A long silence. Then his voice changed. Something under it now that hadn't been there walking in. Older, lower, the sound a man makes when something he's carried a long time finally gets too heavy to hold. What I said, he started. Stopped. Tried again. About your family. About your... He couldn't get the word out a second time. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things for a long time, and I called it pride, and it wasn't. It was just... Wrong, I know, she said. Not cruel. Just true. I appreciate you saying it back to me plain, he said, and there was something almost grateful in it. The review will run its course, she told him. Whatever happens with the business happens with the business. But she's still your son's wife, and that little girl is still your granddaughter, whether the name on her birth certificate is good enough for you or not. What that looks like going forward is between you and your son and God, not between you and me. Out in the hall, my throat went tight, not from anger, from something closer to surprise, because that was the most honest moment that man had ever had anywhere near me, and he didn't even know I was standing 10 feet away to hear it. And then she did something I'll carry the rest of my days. There's one more thing I need you to hear, she said, and her voice dropped low, not weak, the kind of low that fills a room better than any shout. Not as your vendor, not as your daughter-in-law, just as a person who sat at your table for 6 years. I stopped breathing. My father built something out of nothing, she said. He did it quiet, for 31 years, and he never asked one soul for permission or thanks. He did it for me, for my daughter, for a name you decided wasn't worth carrying. A beat. And you spent 9 years keeping your whole company alive inside his building, and you never once knew it. You looked at us and saw common stock. And you ended up sitting across this desk from me in our building, holding a contract that decides whether your stores have anything cold to sell next month. Nobody moved in that room. I'd have heard it. Then I heard something slide across the desk. Small, light, a pen. My father taught me that you don't have to humiliate a man to win, she said. You just have to make the truth real clear and then let him decide what to do with it. I closed my eyes out there in the hallway. The quiet that followed was the longest stretch of seconds I think I've ever stood through, and then I heard it. The little dry scratch of a pen moving across paper. Pierce Lockwood signed. My daughter signed under him, calm, unhurried, the way you sign something you settled in your own mind a long time ago. Nobody made a speech. Nobody twisted the knife. Nobody said out loud who'd won because everybody in that room already knew, and saying it would have only made it smaller. I'll tell you the part that mattered most to me, though. It came 2 days later, and it had nothing to do with that contract. My son-in-law showed up at my door on a Saturday morning, stood on my porch with his hat in his hands like a man who'd finally figured out which side of a table he wanted to die on. He told my daughter he'd already moved out of his father's reach, that he should have stood up that night at the kitchen table, and he'd hate himself a while for not doing it, but that he was standing up now and he'd keep standing up for her and for that little girl, whatever it cost him. I watched my daughter decide whether to believe him. That was hers to decide, too. She let him in. They've got work ahead of them. But he chose. That counts for more than people give it credit for. I didn't go into that meeting. Not for 1 second. I walked downstairs and out across the yard, and I stood next to my old silver truck and looked up at a flat gray Oklahoma sky for a long, quiet minute. 31 years. And not one day of it, not really, was ever about getting even. It was about building something so deep in the ground that when the storm finally came for my family, and it always comes, they'd have somewhere solid to stand. I thought about my father pressing $4,000 in a coffee can into my hands with everything he had left in his eyes, telling me to do it smarter than he did. I thought about my girl at 9 years old holding up a sunfish like she'd conquered the ocean. I thought about my granddaughter on that bench, popsicle running down her wrist, telling me the red one was the good one like it was the most important news in the world. Common stock. That's what the man called us. But this was our bloodline. A man who built it in the dark so nobody could take it. A woman who learned to stand in a room and tell the truth without raising her voice. A little girl who doesn't know yet what's being held in trust for her, but who'll spend her whole life living inside the proof of it. There isn't a contract written or a name old enough to measure that. I got my truck with the hole still in the floorboard, and I turned it toward home, and I drove back across town the same quiet way I'd been driving home for 31 years. Modest truck, modest street, and every single thing that ever mattered exactly where it belonged. If this one got to you, do me a kindness and hit that like button, subscribe for more real, raw, family-first stories like it, and send it to somebody who needs the reminder. As always, thank you for being here. I'll see you on the next one.